Create a warm and engaging narrative for your podcast. Consider Great Tell Me as a suggestion that combines an upbeat and inviting spirit without any background music. Welcome to Tangelic Talks, your go-to podcast from Tangelic, where we dive into the vibrant world of clean energy, development, sustainability, and climate change in Africa. We bring you inspiring stories, insightful discussions, and groundbreaking innovations from the continent making waves in the global community. Tune in and join the conversation toward a brighter, greener future. Let's get started.
Welcome to Tangelic Talks, a podcast at the intersection of energy, equity, and empowerment with your co-host, Victoria Cornelio, myself, Jensen Cummings. In today's episode, we discuss sculpting sustainability through art and entanglements with our guest, Sara Black, Associate Professor of Sculpture at the Art Institute of Chicago. Her artwork uses conscious processes of building or horticulture as a time-based method, disease wood, ecosystem-specific trees and plants, inherited building materials, or other exhausted objects as material, and creates works that expose the complex ways in which things and people are suspended in worlds together. Professor Black, thanks for being with us.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
I pulled that little nugget out of your bio because I thought it was fascinating how your bio was more about nature than it was about you. And I think, right? And I think that potentially expresses itself through your work. And so I was fascinated in that. And I wanted to know if there was a moment, a catalyzing kind of moment where you realized that nature was going to be center stage in your work and in your art.
That's a beautiful question. Gosh, that moment, well, I don't know that I would point to a specific moment, but I can say that probably so much of what has oriented me in my practice comes from how I grew up. So I grew up on a dairy farm and in northern Wisconsin, and the place that I spent the vast majority of my time was poking around in the hayloft with the cats and the birds, or walking around in the back pasture and getting to understand my landscape very, very deeply. And it was just such a deep part of my life. But of course, I was also always very interested in the metaphorical and the way that humans tell stories. And I really enjoyed being a maker of art from the time I was very small. So those two things came together. And right from the beginning, I understood myself as someone who is both, cannot imagine myself separated from the systems that I am a part of, even conceptually, and also as an art maker. So from the time I was in high school and an undergraduate, I was studying both ecology, art, and biology too. So they were together from the beginning. And it's interesting when you mention even the term nature, it's something that I always feel really sensitive to whenever I hear the word, because I understand that I have so effectively trained myself to recognize nature as a thing that we have constructed, an idea that we have constructed, and that we have constructed it as a way historically to sort of separate ourselves. And when I say ourselves, I mean we humans from that thing that we call nature. And one of the, I guess I would say a responsibility that I feel that I have in my practice is to help around invigorating a cultural shift or a conversation in which we question that division between who we are, we humans, and what we call nature. And I, of course, because of those early moments in my life where, they're not even, it wasn't even as though, they were formative for me. Like that was what life was. I was there and I was integrated in those systems and I was surrounded by animals and plants all the time. And I didn't see myself as separate from those things. And it wasn't until I actually went off to school that I started to recognize how powerful that separation has been over many, hundreds of years, sort of beginning with a kind of Western liberalism that I really think is responsible in some ways for so many of the, issues that we're dealing with in terms of climate change and resource extraction and things like that. So I want to question that thing that we're calling nature and talk about how we really are so deeply entangled.
Yeah, I feel that at a personal level because I grew up in the Caribbean, and to me, the idea of going out to nature wasn't a thing. Like you were just in nature, that this is just it. I remember telling
That you are it, right? That it's not something that is out there. It's you too. Yeah.
And I remember telling someone that walking down the street is being in nature. It's like part of it, right? The cities we live in are just a slice of nature as well. And I think from what you're saying, it sounds like, and from reading your work, it sounds like you're challenging that individualistic view of it's us and nature's over there. And your art really interrogates the fallacy of individualism to imagine this entanglement. And you mentioned survivable futures as well. So can you share more about how this theme influences your creative process and the stories you aim to tell?
Yeah, I think that you touched on what I guess is probably like the core of my inquiry. That description from my statement that you read earlier does sort of move through the methodologies of the work, like how I do the work. But if I were to say what it is, the work is really attempting to draw out effectively like the through lines across the ways that we draw boundaries, we humans again, that we sort of project boundaries into the world around us, conceptual boundaries, which are, I want to sort of give a disclaimer that I do believe that they are effective and useful boundaries for us to navigate the world, right? We have to recognize that we have something that's like a self and something like an other, and that there is a staircase that I'm going to walk down and a sidewalk that I'm then going to traverse, right? And that those sort of delineations are useful for us to navigate our world, but they're also very highly linked specifically to like our cognitive and thinking, perceiving apparatus, that they are about us, and that we can't necessarily break out of that, but we can, because of our big brains and our incredible intelligence, we can reflect on it. And we can say, okay, well, if we look to, let's say, the way that any other entity, let's say a tree or any animal, what their experience of the world is, it's going to be very different from ours. And it's possible that they're not going to experience or even care one bit about the boundaries that we draw for our own sort of navigation of the world, but also for our sort of cultural and political beliefs. So I think a lot about the moment in which Europeans sort of separated from pre-modern individuals in thinking about what the liberal subject is and how that really doubled down on this idea of the individual. And we needed that concept. We needed the concept of the liberal political subject in order for our political systems to play out as we wished for them to play out. And what that has done, as we see over the last 500 years, is sort of lock us into this mind frame. And also, in some ways, effectively double down on the way that we draw those lines around pretty much everything. So my work is interested in cutting across those boundaries, whether that be in terms of the individual, like a organism, whether it be time, right? So an individual life, whether it be a system, cutting across those things. So I often call that through lines, like I trace the through lines. And one of the ways that I have done that is through the use of highlighting certain materials like carbon, which is, of course, a material that is always present. It just changes location. Carbon is a hot item these days because we know that it is a pollutant in our atmosphere. And so, and a greenhouse gas, or it causes a greenhouse gas effect with carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and in our oceans. And so drawing out carbon in any material or in any object allows us to see that it has a long durée that far exceeds this individual object or entity and allows us to think differently about what it is that we're looking at.
I had a question on how you kind of position that for your students, thinking about that. So how are you asking somebody who's coming in young, maybe hasn't formed all of those boundaries fully for themselves, but they've been put in some construct that has clear and defined boundaries through their own upbringing? How are you asking them to initially, that first class, that 101, like what are you asking them? How are you asking them to start the process of cutting through those lines for themselves?
Yeah. Okay. Wonderful question. So I'm actually teaching a class right now at the School of the Art Institute in the sculpture department called Knowledge Lab, and it has a subtitle, which is Entanglements. And so this is a perfect example of a class that I teach where I ask students to do exactly this. The way I organize the class is to orient the entire semester toward a single activity. In this case, we have a meal, the last day of class, and we share that meal. We bring in friends. It's very celebratory, but to get to that meal, we do everything that leads up to that process. So we grow food. The classroom is actually a garden, and we grow food indoors ahead of time. We're already starting that process now in February. We forage for food. We do this a little closer to the date of our meal. We grow mushrooms, and we explore the sort of mycelial structures that are a part of their growth. We harvest wild clay, and then we make our own tableware. And we also find reclaimed wood material, and we make what we call sympoiesis furniture. I'm stealing that term. The inspiration for that term is from the theorist Donna Haraway, who talks about sympoiesis as a process of how we are entangled with one another and co-generating each other. So we call this sympoiesis furniture, where we plan to make a structure where we can feed ourselves and also feed many other organisms at the same time. So we feed worms as part of our vermiculture process, and we feed ourselves, we feed the birds, we feed the microorganisms in our bellies and beyond. And so we're thinking really conceptually about all of the entanglements that lead to a simple event, which is a meal. And so the students are we read lots of texts, we watch lots of really interesting films, and we learn about these processes, or I should say, these forms of entanglement that we are embedded in all the time. And we use it's a digital whiteboard on the computer that we can collaborate on. And from the very beginning of the class, we start to draw the entanglements, the systems that we're connected to. So of course, the food systems, we are connected to various natural systems. We are connected to economic systems, all of the above. And what's wild about this is that they start to see that entanglements are indefinite, right? Like that it just goes on and on. We can basically trace our own lives and experience and movements through the earth to the, to stardust, right? I mean, it gets cosmic beyond reach when you start to trace the entanglements, social, economic, natural, etc. So that's one way that I teach entanglements, and it's and I should also share that this is a class. It's an art class. It's a studio art class in which we're actually learning about collective art making. So everything we do in this class, we're doing as a named collective. So we think of ourselves as like an art collective from the very beginning, and throughout the 15 weeks of the semester, we're identifying in that way. So we're learning how to do creative collaboration as well.
So my background's as a chef, so you're blowing my mind right now.
Oh, you would love this. It is such a...
How do I get an invite to this dinner?
Consider yourself invited.
Yeah, I'm there. This is amazing.
Yeah, it's really very fun. It's really amazing to sort of witness the things that are so often hidden. And really what I believe in the end is that art is, and this is what I talk about with students a lot, is that really the circumstances that we are dealing with right now, like the problems that we are dealing with right now, have so much to do with what is being hidden from view. And we hide things from view, partly because they're literally invisible. So we have to look for them, partly because they're culturally insignificant to us. They're not as important to us, right? So we are particularly concerned with the individual, with consumerism, with individual growth, and less concerned about the ways that we're entangled with the various kin that we are engaged with. And so making those things visible again. They're invisible economically, right? Hidden costs and everything. So we spend this semester basically trying to make the invisible visible so that we can make some cultural shifts, so we can tell a different story about what's happening on planet Earth and how we want to engage in less damaging behaviors.
Yeah. And I think that's really cool because it shows why you're calling it entanglement. I think a lot of people get stuck on systems, right? The system of this and the system of that. I think entanglement is a really great way to show, like you just said, the through line of this thing is entangled with this thing and it's all coming together. And it's really cool that you see yourselves as a collective, because it was something I was really interested in. Since you're challenging this individualism, I wonder with this collectivism now, that collaborative practice, how does that shape your projects, and how does working with, say, other influences lead the narrative and the engagement of that interconnectedness in your pieces, that basically entanglement?
Yeah. Thanks for the question. I often talk about collaboration less as a sort of, a choice that I make, as a part of my practice that is really just sort of administrative and practical, but instead I think about it as part of the material of the work and a means of demonstrating the concepts in the work. So oftentimes I will joke that things like, people, materials, tools, time, all of it is in the artistic process that I am engaged in. And it's not just behind the scenes. It's in and it's visible, or at least I'm attempting to make it visible. So when I talk about time-based methods like horticulture or building and things like that, these are things that are not hidden behind the scenes. So, a more traditional art practice involves a studio space in which an artist is engaged in various processes of aesthesis. They're, painting or chopping or molding or melding, whatever it is that they're doing, but that's all happening outside of the gaze of the viewer or the audience. And then you open the door, you carry the work through, you put it in the space, and then it's unveiled. And that's the moment that the audience gets to take in the work. In the case of my work, I bring in, or it's certainly not generated by me alone, right? The work is always co-generated with other people, and I do that purposefully. And it's not always just other people, right? Currently, I'm working on a project where I have been collaborating with a lot of non-human entities, including a lot of plants and animals. This project is called Untidy Objects, and it's actually it's a space, it's a living sculpture that my collaborators and I'll name them because they are so extraordinary. Sam Frost, who's a political theorist, Amber Ginsberg, who is a visual artist, and Mark Downey, who is a digital artist who works in a lot of computational forms. The four of us have created over several years now, we've restored a piece of land that is adjacent to the University of Chicago that was like a fallow piece of lawn. And it was, chemically treated and watered and mowed, and just the way that we see all the time, of course, very, very low on diversity of life forms. And we've brought this back to what looks mostly like a sort of native prairie, or it's a piece of land that is wild at this point, and the number of species that are living there is extraordinary. And what we're aiming to do here is to retell the story of the individual political subject and show, we're calling this entity, which I would describe as a sort of expanded political subject. We're calling this an untidy object. it's a bit of an untidy term, but it's been useful for us. And what we're aiming to do is write a co-constitution, which is something like a multi-species constitution, where we can show evidence of the entanglements of all of these beings, humans, plants, and beyond. And we're doing so utilizing visual reality technology that will sort of map these entanglements in this space and represent it in an exhibition. And we're also writing this book called A Co-Constitution, where we're going to tell the story of this expanded political subject and how it might be protected through our various legal systems. So we're really trying to model not only not only making these visible in order to sort of tell the story of it in an aesthetic way, but we're actually interested in trying to model for it in a political context moving forward, because what we recognize is that many of the ways that we are doing rights of nature work in the world now, which is like, say, for example, offering personhood to other than human beings, is actually in some ways doubling down on concepts of individualism. And what we're interested in doing is talking about the political entities that deserve protection as much more entangled beings, right? So it's like you and all of these things that you are entangled with, or the plant and all of these things. It's almost hard to conceive of at this point because we do not think that way, but we're giving it a go in this artwork and hope to sort of demonstrate this through an exhibition that'll be coming up in a year or so. But yes, so everything is all in, and playing out over time is a really important conceptual strategy and methodology in the work.
Please send us the link to purchase the book when it's out. This is amazing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
When you think of your audience, it's interesting because I would think like, who's your target audience and who you're going after, but it feels like that's not the right question. The right question is maybe like, what moment in their life are they at where they're ready to receive this type of art, this type of work, this type of political statement, this type of entanglement? Is there a moment where they're ready to hear you, to see what you're working on that you recognize?
What I have recognized in an audience, and this, it isn't a question of age per se, though I would argue that I think our youth, younger generation is readier for this type of inquiry, this type of experience where they can see themselves as more deeply entangled with the systems that they are part of, and that they have a kind of, I mean, perhaps this is just a condition of being young in general, like non-adults, is that there's a certain kind of openness. But I also recognize that they're sensitive to the sort of risks involved in the way that we're living now. Some young adults are feeling really cynical and really scared and don't necessarily see a future for themselves that feels promising. But a lot of them really are very open to witnessing the world in a different way and practicing things in a different way. I find that even, say, with my own children or my students, that they're ready and they're positive, right? Like they're like, of course, yes, let's get all up in there and see ourselves as in a non-hierarchical relationship with this thing that we call nature. Let's look at our kinship. Let's look at our entanglements. Let's try to take care of things because the earth is our home. It's our larger body and we want it to survive. We love it because we love it. And that is a kind of easier instinct, I think, for people who haven't been practicing, right, in this like intense sort of cultural individualism that we have all been embedded in, you know, we folks who have been around quite a bit longer. So, but what I do believe, to answer the question a little bit more directly, is that I think that we honestly just need to see it to believe it with anything, right? Like, and I think that's where visual art and experiential education kind of come in. And it's why it's my sort of bailiwick. It's why I love that area, because I don't actually have to say anything. Like, I'm not really interested in being a kind of like proselytizing or didactic kind of lecturing person, right? I'm not interested in that because I don't really think it works. I mean, we are absorbed in and like immersed in so much information and so many opinions, right? Like I can represent information in the form of words and lectures, and I'm only going to get so far because we bring in our existing belief systems and we, filter. And I also am not really interested in being a person who like changes people. What I want to be is someone who's part of a much larger movement that is sensitive and attentive and hopeful and willing to work hard to evolve our cultural belief systems so that we can have a brighter future, so that we can sustain, so that we can bring care and like mutual aid into the conversation in a kind of natural way. And I think once we start to disentangle, and it's happening everywhere, like this isn't my idea, right? I'm part of something that is so big and so wide and so global. I'm just one more sort of person working or, group of people working to sort of demonstrate these ideas. As opposed to being a talking head, I want to demonstrate these things. So when I make a sculpture like Untidy Objects that I was just referring to, the idea is that you go into it, that you see it, that you feel the connections, that you recognize something that wasn't so visible to you before. And then I don't have to do any convincing. It's just there, right? And so it's a matter of, and I do the same, I sort of teach in an experiential education method, like I was describing with the Knowledge Lab. Knowledge is something that's not just cognitive, right? Knowledge is a thing that we have in our bodies. And so much of what becomes daily knowledge for us has to do with what we experience on a daily basis and what we focus on. So if you're a person that does meditation all the time, right, you understand something different about how the world works than if you are someone who's constantly just working on, a computer and working in a word processing environment, right? You're just going to have different realities. And so what I want to do with my work is just get people into these environments so that they can have a different form of embodied knowledge, and so that they can see and feel and understand things that I don't have to teach them. This isn't me trying to proselytize. This is me just knowing that if we recognize that, say, the earth is our larger body, or that we are entangled in this way, then we may feel internally motivated to care, to take care of something that is effectively responsible for our own survival, right? We are, whether we like it or not, self-centered, human-centric beings. And so how can we work with those tendencies to fight for and care for these systems that we're embedded in? Because in the end, it's going to take care of us too.
Yeah, and it sounds like your art has a through line there that is very activism focused and sort of not necessarily you're trying to get people in, but you're showing them this is what the world could be. This is how entangled we are, and you're part of this. So I wonder if you have any suggestions or advice for artists that are just starting out in this sort of field like you are that may be interested in doing something like this.
Yeah, that's, I guess I think the advice that I've given myself since I was young that has really helped me, and also that I share, like, say, with the graduate students that I work with, is the arts, like any other profession, have a tendency to focus a bit on individual successes, and sometimes even to the extent that it starts to get swallowed up in like celebrity culture and like how visible can you be as an individual artist. And, of course, it's important that we have a strong voice and that we make ourselves known and visible within careers like the visual arts or the arts in general, because that is how the work continues to grow, right? Like you have to have the exhibition, you have to have the performance, you have to have the whatever in order for more invitations to come and for the work to flourish and thrive. So I don't ever discourage people working really hard and sticking their necks out and being vulnerable, but I also always want to encourage my students to worry less about the career aspects and think about the thing that they want their work to do in the world. So I'm always saying, what is the work of your artwork? What do you want it to do? How do you want it to be in the world? And once you recognize what you want your work to do, what you want the work of the work to be, then get behind that and push for that. It isn't about us. It isn't about our egos. It isn't about us as individuals. If you put yourself and your energy and your creative agency behind the work of the work, that will propel the work into visibility. And so I have been able to, I think, thank goodness, sort of move my ego off to the side in my practice for a good while now. Of course, I struggled with that as any young artist would in my 20s and when I was beginning, because I didn't know how to have a practice. It's like, how do I actually make this thing propel forward? But what I realized is that I had to do was actually determine what I wanted the work to do. And what I want my work to do, as I was saying before, is to contribute to this larger movement that is aiming to heal the relationship between humans and other than human beings and recognize how important our cooperation, mutual care is for our survival on the planet and many, many other beings' survival. And once I sort of set that out as the goal, then I didn't have to worry so much about myself. I could join lots of other people and use the waves and the movement that are in these creative practices already. I really believe in art's power to evolve culture and help us adapt. And I think what we're looking at right now, even if we look at it in a really basic, climatological way or biological way, in terms of evolutionary biology, like what we're looking at right now is a change that's already so far into its process that it's not stopping. And so the question is not how are we going to stop this cascade of events that are going to occur climatologically because of anthropogenic behaviors. It's not how we're going to stop it. It's how we're going to adapt and how we're going to help other species adapt. So one project that I'm just initiating right now is one in which a group of us, I'm part of a group called the Mississippi River Open School for Kinship and Social Exchange. And that group is right now conceiving of a project where we will assist trees in migration. The Mississippi River flows south in our watershed, but we're actually interested in helping the trees move north at a rate that, upriver, at a rate that will make it possible for them where they, humans, we've got these great legs that we can walk on and cars that we can drive in, but trees are rooted and they're going to need assistance in moving north quickly enough into the climate zones where they can thrive. And so the question is, how are we going to adapt quickly enough? And culturally, we have a lot of work to do in order for that adaptation to occur, I believe.
Yeah, this went way too fast, by the way.
You're a very engaging speaker.
That was really good. You had us all very entangled in your great job of just expressing what that art is doing. So really appreciate you being able to be in the art and be here with us and be able to express it in a multitude of ways. We really appreciate that for the audience. I know it's going to go a long way. And now I have a dinner to plan to come to. So I'm excited. Selfishly, for my little moment of individualism, I have a big win here from this episode. So I appreciate that. We're going to stay on, as always, everybody, for just a couple more minutes with Professor Sara Black of the Arts Institute of Chicago. And we've been talking sculpting sustainability through art and entanglements. Great episode thus far. Make sure and check out the content on the blog post. And we appreciate you being with us. This is really powerful.
Thank you for being here.
Oh, yes. Thank you. What a pleasure. What an honor.
Let's talk power, let's talk change. From rural lights to brighter days. Equity rising, voices strong. We're building tomorrow where we all belong. Tangelic Talks, energy, equity, pride. Empowering the world, side by side. A spark becomes a fire, a vision that's true. Together we rise, it starts with you.